Welcome to One Bad Podcast. Here's your hosts, KD and Shaner.
So, Katie, we've been teeing it up now. It's, the Red Album's in the can. Black Buffalo, we've gone through that whole era. Now it is the Made in the Name of Rock and Roll era. And we started writing this record. And, just like the other records, we started writing songs on the road. The cool thing is to set this era up is that one of the first songs we wrote, which I kind of count as part of the Black Buffalo era because we were writing it at the tail end of that record, was Raging Bull, one of the first songs that we had worked on for this record, which, man, we all knew there was something cool in that song. And I remember writing it at the Jam spot in Saskatoon. And I do love that about this era, that it was kind of like, no matter how this era turned out in some ways, like that was our song. We wrote that tune. It was very much in that same kind of spirit of us, like kind of taking our writing to the next level. And I remember it was another one of those Hicks riffs that was just like, holy shit, that's cool. Like, okay, like, and we worked on it a lot. I don't know if you remember how much we put into writing that song.
Well, I remember of course, once someone makes a great suggestion, it's like you wonder how you never saw it before, but the song never started with that riff, the da-na-na-na, like it didn't start. Remember, it just built like da-na-na-na. There's just that whole build. Our idea was like just build, and then kick into that riff like, a minute into the song. And that's when, Gavin Brown, our producer, one of his strokes of genius was like, always start with the awesome, catchy part. So start with the riff, and then people will be hooked, and then you do the building thing. And once we did it, I was like, oh my God, that's it, and
it's funny how that comes about too, because I think that even our riffy kind of songs, that you sometimes don't know what that song is. And when we started writing Raging Bull, I think it did start with kind of the verse riff, right? And weirdly, a lot of our songs do start that way, where we get like a catchy verse riff. I remember we talked about Satellite Hotel was like that. The verse was so killer, and it was impossible to find a good chorus for it. But I think it was kind of like, you don't know it's a big rock song yet, because we had that build and we weren't sure, like, is this kind of more in the vein of Scarecrows even, right? Because that's one thing about songwriting is you can take just a nice, simple acoustic, like little lick, and you could blow that up into a huge rock tune, or you could really strip it back. And I mean, Scarecrows was like that. Like it was super fast and it was slow, and but you're right. It was kind of like when we moved the riff up to the front, it was like, oh, okay, this is a rock song. This is like, and this might be one of the best songs we've written. And it's weird when you're in the middle of writing a song. It's like you kind of don't even know what you're looking at yet. Sometimes you're so deep into it. We've now joked about the fact that we've written, I don't know, probably 30 songs that we were like, this has got a Springsteen vibe. And it turns out to be like Vinyl Spin Burner, where you're like, I don't know where we heard Springsteen, but when you're in the middle of it, like you don't know exactly what it is. And that's what a good producer will help you do oftentimes, is like, man, if you guys take that cool riff and just like, make that a riff, make that a rock song. You're like, oh, okay. Yeah. All right. And then it just went from there, because we kind of had the whole song just in a slightly different arrangement, right? And the lyrics and everything, and like your beat on it was crazy. It just had like the slide and stuff was there. So it's funny. We move the riff to the front and start with the catchy part. That's a great little songwriting detail for anybody out there writing songs.
And that, honestly, like that, and that's my favorite part about being a musician, like playing live for sure, but also just like those moments of creation where you're turning nothing into something, like that's the magic, right? And it's also the most frustrating when you can't get the magic. You got the rabbit in the hat, but you can't pull it out, sort of thing. And it's like, but it's like, because sometimes we've had those too. We've had songs that have taken us, and we still haven't finished this. Remember Sunshine State from like, that's from 2009, I would say. But catchy.
My Name Is Nobody. I think there's a YouTube video from probably like 2007. I somehow stumbled across it the other day. I'm like, man, that's a cool idea. And then we tried to write that for probably 6 years before we we gave up on it.
Well,
You know,
the listeners will know that we're out of ideas if we start really focusing on those old those old songs, trying to complete them. But that's always like the worst feeling. It's not worse. It's frustrating feeling. Is like you got something great, like Sunshine State, such a great verse, and then we could never get a good chorus. The choruses, we tried 10 different choruses and they all sucked. The verses could be some of your catchiest versing ever. Um, and then it's the songs where you're not thinking, and it just comes out of nowhere. That's always like every songwriter, it's almost cliche. It's like songs come through me, which is true, but it's like it's so cliche to say that now. But it's like our biggest hits: Scarecrows, Blues, Satellite, Raging Bull. It's like just came out of nowhere and then just essentially wrote itself. And those are the songs that I just like. I live for those moments, right? I'd rather do that than rehearse old songs or something. It's like let's not rehearse the set tomorrow. Let's just write new songs.
Well, because it's a good point, because it is like you get addicted to the moment, the breakthrough moment where a song starts to make sense, and everybody, especially as a band, like, it's a magical thing when you're in the room with a bunch of your friends, and it's like, it's kind of like everybody starts to pick up on the same thing at the same time, where it all starts to make sense. Like, it is such you're right, like as amazing as playing live and stuff is, that might be one of my favorite, just like you said, like one of my favorite moments is when you get the moment where it all makes sense, and it's like, holy shit, wow, like this is a song now. Like that just, it's really hard to compare that to anything, because it is like it's a real magical feeling, and again, to do that as a group, it's so cool. Everyone's picking up on that vibe, and it's a very magical experience for sure, and an equally frustrating experience when it doesn't happen.
Well, and so that's a good segue into Made in the Name, because we had kind of 4 songs more or less kind of worked out. We got Gavin, we wanted to get a producer who had some hits, and had that sort of pop sensibility ish, and
because he did a lot of 3 Days Grace stuff, like their early stuff, so it was different for us, but also, like I said in the last episode, we wanted to be open, and maybe be open to like not changing our sound, but just sort of like letting it go somewhere, or just be open to it doing something that we were a little less in control of it as we had been, right? So
yeah. And so we went to the Warehouse, which is like, one of my favorite studios ever. AC/DC and Aerosmith did records there, whatever. And it's like
downtown Vancouver. It's the Bryan Adams studio, for anybody out there that hasn't heard of the Warehouse before.
Yeah, and it was like, and those first 4 songs were great. I remember sitting down with Gavin, and he chatted with all of us, and he's like, what are your goals for the band? And he's like, be honest with yourself, like, how much do you want to make? How much money do you want to make in a year? Yeah. And then so we all sat, and I was like, oh shit, I don't know what's, I don't want to be selfish, but like whatever, it's like, but that part was great. I remember, like, I think every musician someone should sit down with them and say, what are your goals? What will be success for you? What would define success? Is it making $100,000 a year, or is it making $1 million a year, or is it making $10 million a year? I mean, the 10 mil maybe is a stretch in today's industry, but if it's making $1 million, then okay. And then what kind of songs do you write? Can they appeal to the masses? If they can't, well then maybe you got to reassess the music you make, or how much money you want to make in a year. But I remember having these discussions, and then he's like, okay, one of the cool exercises was like, everyone write down, describe your typical fan, like of your band, One Bad Son. And so we did that, and then one of the things he said, which is really helpful, is like, your songs should be about, appealing to the fans, like writing about topics that the fans could relate to, right? So if the fans, if they're blue collar rock fans who like fast cars and drinking beer and whatever, then the song should connect to those fans, right? Yeah. And I remember it was like kind of an eye opener for us, because I think you and I both kind of thought that perhaps we're more intellectual than some of the sort of, base level rock fans, right? And so it's that sort of, but then again, so was Gord Downey's lyrics were
Yeah.
quite intellectual, right? But he still appealed to all sorts of rock fans. So we weren't quite on like the AC/DC sort of level of in terms of what you're writing about, and we definitely weren't like 3 Days Grace. We were kind of in our own lane. But anyways, the point is, it was kind of really helpful to be like, here's like, do some real self analysis about
Yeah.
the band, and that'll help you decide what you have to do to become as big as you can be. And so
Yeah.
we sort of embarked
When
on
it was
that
all
journey.
about, yeah, and it was about like gaining clarity, right? Like, something that lyrically we talked about was like just trying to be clear, and like not trying to be too nebulous with stuff, being a bit more clear, which, it made a lot of sense. And it was like, it was, I felt a lot of growth. Like, you're right, the Made in the Name was kind of like done in two halves. So I felt like those first four songs, there was a lot of growth, and kind of, it did feel good and energizing. And those songs it was Raging Bull, The Promise, Flying High, and what was the fourth one that we did out there?
What was the fourth? Yeah, I remember Flying High and Promise.
That's funny. Then whatever the fourth one was, it'll come to me. Probably as soon as this episode's over, I'll be like, oh shit, it was that one. But this kind of leads into like our era right now and the EP we have coming out, because I remember this is kind of like there was so many things happening at the same time. The first four songs we did for Made in the Name, it did feel like you've been talking about. It felt creative. It felt kind of liberating to talk to somebody, not just about like just songwriting, but more like, what are your goals? Like, what is your band? Like, what do you think it is? What do you want it to be? And picking it and doing that thing, and um, it was a super like creative period. But it leads into this era now, because I remember we had four songs that were awesome, especially Raging Bull. We were like, man, that's a single. Like, we'd be hard pressed to write a better song than that, as a first single. Like, who knows, maybe we would in the next 6 months. But I remember we were like, do we need to do a full record? Right. Like, so now this is probably 2016. It came out in 2017. So we're already getting into this era where like albums aren't what they used to be. Um, Speaking of money and stuff, we were like, well, do we need to dump a bunch of cash into a full length record? Like, we've got four killer songs, especially this one tune that like we all kind of feel like no matter what we record, we'd probably release this first anyways, right? And you and I talked about like, what if we just put Raging Bull out? We could put out Raging Bull, because Spotify and Apple Music's already popping off. And we knew that like radio was starting to diminish a little bit and streaming was starting to kind of take over. So we were like, we need to start getting on top of this, and maybe we start kind of focusing on streaming. So what if we release Raging Bull and we then put out a B-side, just like we just did this with Sister Renegade, where it's just like, put one out for the fans, right? Like, why hold back on them, So, and then we can go on tour, because when you put a record out, people need to know it's like you got a single and a record, but then that's it. Like, you do a tour and now it's like you got to do another record to keep the momentum going. So we were like, what if we put out a single? What if we put out a B-side? Go on tour, see how that does. We could maybe record some more while we're doing that. And, we were talking about these creative ways, which is exactly how we're putting music out now. And so many bands are. And the label was like, no, like, hard no. It's going to be before you put a single out. We want the record finished. Like, I felt, man, we were on kind of riding this high with those four songs. And it was like, maybe we could, part of what we're doing wrong too is sort of just putting music out in an old world kind of 90s sort of way. Like, why not throw singles out, use your money more wisely. Right. And we started to have this battle with I don't want to try not to devolve into a complainer here, but there were these moments where we were like, dude, we could do this. Like, that would make sense. But
Well,
then it
and
was like, no, we signed a contract that said full record. And so then that got delayed, because we could have put Raging Bull out far sooner, rode the success and really rode out the success of that record for a long time. But you know, as you know, as a in your other career as an entertainment lawyer, it's like you get beholden to contracts, and there's not much you can do sometimes as an artist.
Well, and the thing is, we like, let's say, yeah, there's a 10-song delivery commitment. We weren't saying we'll just give them 4 and then that'll meet it. We said let's do 4 and then another 4 and another 2. Like we were going to give 10, but the label said no. And with the benefit of hindsight, it's like instead of going with our plan, which I think would have been way better, they sent us to Toronto to record the rest of the record. And in some ways, that recording of the rest of the record almost broke us up, you know, like it was a low point, and we won't get into some of the reasons why, but you know, part of it was some of the issues with the producer and you know, and trying to put, you know, honestly drive a wedge between us, I would say, if we're being honest, you know, and so anyways, yeah, so the 6-4 sent us to Toronto to finish the record and almost broke us up. So so there we go. I think we knew better in that instance, but the sad reality is that labels, you know, they always think they know better than their artists. You know, they want to keep, like the old saying, it's like treat artists like mushrooms. You know, keep them in the dark and feed them shit. You know, I don't know if I've already used that on this podcast or not. Have I? No. Okay, I say it every other week, so I forget who I've said it to. But it's so true, right? That's music industry 101. It's like, don't let the artists think they're in control, because then they start getting too demanding. You know.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. And, you know, we're up on time on this one. And there's a couple different ways we can go, because like, you're right. Like, to finish this record out, I felt like after we kind of had that discussion with the label, I started to get that defeated feeling again of like, we could be innovative. We could be, you know, start doing stuff differently. And it was kind of like, man, you just had this feeling like the writing's on the wall, that it's kind of like, we're just going to do the same old thing, and maybe magically something will happen out of that. And you realize as an artist, it's like, you got to be proactive. You can't just, you know, it's like like a very classic definition of insanity of like, let's do the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different outcome. You're like, you know, so we'll end this one here, and then, yeah, because obviously we do get a #1 hit out of this record, and that obviously was massive. Like, there were amazing things came out of this era, as much as it was like a very light and dark era for OBS. So we'll get into that one next time, buddy.
Okay, well, and I was looking at my Spotify. I wasn't not listening. I was looking up to try to figure out what that 4th song was. So was it either Like a Weapon or Rise Up? Was it Rise Up, maybe?
I think it was Rise Up. I think
Like
it was
a Weapon,
Rise Up.
Yeah, Like a Weapon was a Toronto jam, I think. But
yes,
Rise Up and like you know, like the big toms. I think that was at the warehouse. So that was the 4th song, I think, Rise Up.
Okay, great. Well, finally we solved it, because we got to do it live.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, sweet. Well, we'll circle back next episode with a #1 song and see where that leads us.
Yeah, buddy.
Okay, peace, buddy.
Thanks for listening to One Bad Podcast.